Hello, this is Krystle Boateng, author and print accessibility advocate, and you're listening to White Canes Connect.
Hey there, PA Federationists. Welcome to another episode of White Canes Connect, presented by the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania. My name is David Goldstein. I'm the first vice president of the NFB of PA. Joining me today, as always, is White Canes Connect creator and co-host, Lisa Bryant. Lisa, how are you today?
I am great. And speaking of great, we have a great conversation with Krystle Boateng. She is creator, author of Inside Ability books, and we found out about her through our own Simone Cooper.
Yeah, it was amazing how Simone was so emotional about that interaction with Krystle down at the NFB Convention in Orlando that you reached out to Krystle and got her to come on. And what a great interview. What a great idea. And it's hard to believe that no one has come out with books like this, especially the high contrast, just a great idea and great on many levels. And one thing that I think will be something that we'll see more of as we move forward, and she mentions it in the interview, at some point, people other than folks who are visually impaired, blind, low vision, whatever you want to say, folks who can't see are, will start to read these books and see a use for them. As she mentions in the interview, those classrooms where the kids who are 20 feet away can never read a number 12 point font from the back of the room, but with the large print books, especially with the high contrast, they'll be able to read along if they're of that age and look at the picture as well. So somewhere along the line, this is really going to break for Krystle, I think.
One thing I thought of, David, too, as you were speaking and as we talk with Krystle, is just how universal accessibility is.
It really is. And as we move forward, as people, again, get the idea of, hey, that's not a bad idea to do that, or better yet, the people that know of someone in their family or the neighbor down the street who has some sort of visual issue, they're going to think, hey, this is a great idea, and this would be a perfect gift for that person. And that person will really appreciate it, I think.
So let's hear Krystle's story.
Krystle, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. I really do appreciate the opportunity.
And Krystle, I have to say, you came to us probably the best way possible, which is a referral from a satisfied customer. We heard about you through one of our fellow Federationist, Simone Cooper, who shared a very moving encounter she had with you at our recent convention in Orlando. You remember that moment. Why don't
Yes,
we
I
start
do.
off talking about that? Talk about the exchange with Simone.
I had a table at the exhibit. For some context, I create jumbo large text children's picture books that come in two contrast options for the text, either white background with black letters or the reverse contrast, which is black background with white letters. And so, I was standing at my table. Simone came by. She walked, she stopped. Because I'm also legally blind, I don't have central vision. I just noticed the figure of a person coming and stopping, but I really couldn't perceive, what kind of response they were having to the books that I had laid in front of me. But my aunt was next to me, who's fully sighted, and she said, I think she really likes your books. I think she's like really taken aback by the books. And so I said, hi, welcome to the Inside Ability Books table. And, from the audio I was getting from her, I could tell that she was becoming emotional. And so I came around the table and I said, I'm a hugger. I totally get it. And she was like, wow, I can see this. Like I try to explain to people that, I need large print or I need it in a higher contrast, but folks don't really always understand. And like, you've got it just right. You've got it just on point. And I was like, yes, girl, because that's exactly what I need. And so we cried, we hugged, and she thanked me so much for starting the company. And she actually left and came back. So we had a few different exchanges, and it was just so great. To be honest, as an entrepreneur, forging my way in a very niche space, when I do get positive feedback like that, it just gives me the energy to keep going because, certainly I try my best in opportunities such as this to get myself out there, get the word out about my brand and the books and the accessibility features that I incorporate. But I certainly don't have a huge marketing machine behind me. And so, entrepreneurs out there, you understand the ups and the downs and you have to kind of fake it till you make it kind of mindset. And to get that affirmation from her, I just knew that I'm doing important work and I have to just keep going.
Yeah. I wanted to start off with that because I wanted folks out there to know what kind of void you are filling with
Yeah.
insightability. So
Yeah.
I want to get really, of course, we're going to talk extensively about your line of books and, with a format, but I wanted you to share also a little bit about you and how your vision journey led you to creating insightability.
At the age of 19, I developed an idiopathic autoimmune disorder called uveitis, which is actually pan-uveitis, which is inflammation of all chambers of the eye, which subsequently led to quite a few complications. And then ultimately, I lost central vision. I was 19, I was away at school. It was a very pivotal time of life. And I think at that stage, you're getting ready to launch, you have all of these visions of your future aspirations. And as this was happening, as I was losing sight and ultimately becoming legally blind, I wasn't sure how many of my aspirations I would still be able to see through, if you will. And so at that time, I leaned heavily on my creative writing. I got lost in stories of characters that I could control the plot. I would create challenges for them. I would purposely give them a happy ending that did not match what they were expecting. Because I think on a subconscious level, I was trying to coach myself to just allow life to unfold and to know that all of the positive things that I could ever want from myself were still available to me. They just may look differently, and I may not be able to perceive what that might be at this time, but that I just needed to be able to hold space to receive those things when they arrived. And so that was kind of my basis of creative writing. Prior to that, I had always loved imagining and make pretend and writing short stories. But,
Mhm.
when you get to be of a certain age and you're going off to college, it becomes, well, what can you make a living with? Right.
Right.
And I didn't see myself as an artist. I saw myself as going a more serious path and getting something a little more stable and predictable in terms of income. And there I was in business school, lost in my creative writing, trying to hold on to my sanity. So the gift that I had sort of not given a lot of, weight and value, if you will, was the thing that I believe saved me and allowed me to hold on to hope and to thrive in the face of adversity and complete school on time with a double major on the dean's list because I carried those happy emotions from my imaginings into my waking life. That was my balance between like, oh my goodness, what is happening to me? And, finding still that I could create joy for myself.
What school did you go to?
George Washington University in DC. There's a lot of school pride from the alum and the current students. There's definitely a lot of pride. And so, coming out of school, I forged into employment. And once I felt that I had, healed, quote unquote, from the hurt of vision loss, I kind of set aside my writing. Later, when I became a mom, and they tell you right away, read to baby. That's the fundamentals of language and literacy and all of those things. I was like, okay, got it, understood.
Mhm.
And so I went into the market to find large print books, which I assumed would be there because as a visually impaired, legally blind, partially sighted, all the terms person, I know where to get my workarounds, my large print keyboard, I reversed the contrast on all of my screens. I know where to get all my magnifiers, CCTVs, etc. But as I searched the market, I didn't find any books that were consistent throughout large print. It might have been chosen on a page for a style and then also contrast. So you might have a blue sky with blue letters over it. That, for a person like me, is not going to pop off the screen for me to be even know that the words are there, right? And so I thought to myself, like, okay, well, I'm naturally a creative person. Like, I can come up with stories, but then it's like, well, how do you make a book? right?
Mhm, mhm.
So then that became the self-study where I went online and I, watched a lot of YouTube and I did a lot of Googling and I meandered my way through. I felt my way through and I came to producing Inside Ability Books, which is a producer and online retailer of accessible print children's books. And my very first project was a bedtime story because that was where I kind of felt that vacancy. My husband would read and I would just be kind of sitting there as an audience member.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so that was my first inspiration to do a bedtime story where I could cuddle up with my young one and, I can be the one to read the story to him. And then the stories just kept flowing from there.
So the first book launched what year?
That was 2022.
And you have how many books out now, and what are the different formats?
They are all hardcover printed books. I have 4 books available, but all 4 books are available in the 2 contrast options that I described before. You can either choose to have white background with black letters or black background with white letters. For those who are not as familiar, when there's too much light color or white on a page, it can create glare for some people. So having that reverse contrast, basically having most of the reading area be dark or black and then the words be white is actually a softer read. So in formulating how I wanted to address print accessibility, I knew size was going to be a concern, but then I also wanted to address contrast as a barrier as well.
Yeah. I love that it took your own experience of becoming a mom. Because it
Right.
sounded like you were able to, you had your tools to do what you needed to do to finish school, to work. But that next season of motherhood, that
Right.
showed that there was still, you still needed assistance. And I love how it took
Exactly.
that transition for you to create this. And that's really what it's all about. So how has it been reading your own books to your boys?
Oh, it's been great. It's been
Yeah.
great. I love it. I think because the words are so large and they're able to engage with the words as well as the image. Both of my children are early readers. I'm not quoting that. There's no clinical studies, to say that my books do that for kids. I'm just saying that for
Good.
my kids, it had that effect. And so it's been really great. And, they'll bring other books to me and I'll say, honey, that's too small for mommy.
Mhm.
And they say, "Oh, yeah, we gotta get one of mommy's books."
And you also have an audience now to test out, oh, is this a good story? Let me run it by the kids. And if they're
Exactly,
engaged,
exactly.
and then you say, okay, I better write this down. That's one
Absolutely.
thing that when my kids were little, if I couldn't remember a book and they say, hey, tell me a story, I would make one up. And sometimes they were great, but then I would forget
Yeah,
what they were. And so they were
right.
never
And
written
you
down
can't
and they're gone
redo it.
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
gone
Yeah.
forever. So I'm just curious on a couple of things. Do you keep data on the as far as what sells the black on white or white on black? Is there a clear winner there?
To be honest, when I look at the analytics, it's like 50-50 because what ends up happening is some people buy it for the novelty of it, like, oh, this is different, right? Some people buy it for the utility of it. And oftentimes, if I'm like at an in person vendor event, people will say, well, which one is better? And I'll say, well, I prefer this one, because
Yeah.
it might be a fully sighted person who's like, it makes me no difference, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of feedback from people on the neurodiversity spectrum. I've been told that many people do reverse contrast who have dyslexia or autism or specifically have focus challenges when they're reading, maybe the words jump around the page, things like that. I've been told that reverse contrast is helpful in those particular barriers. Certainly there's a lot of visually impaired people who find that to be a comfort when they're reading. There are, you know, dark reverse contrast keyboards and all types of things out there already in the market. I was just applying that tool to children's books. And what I tell people is, my approach is not, would not be applicable to an adult novel or a magazine. But I think in the space of picture books, where it's really just a graphic, you kind of have that room to play around with to create that accessibility for the storytime strugglers or the early readers to not necessarily have to utilize a screen or technology for that particular experience.
I read on, I think it was on your website, that there's nothing else out there like this right now. So you're kind of paving
I've
the
gotten that
way.
Right. I've gotten that confirmation from countless librarians and TVIs that there's nothing like this on the market. And so, it's interesting because I'll get approached by people and they're like, "Oh, why aren't you everywhere? Why aren't you famous? Like,
Mm.
why aren't you in Barnes and Noble? Like, do you do other books? Like, Harry, whatever other, famous picture books that are out there, and I was like, well, no, I don't have the license for those. I would love to get into some partnerships with the larger publishing companies if they would be willing to hear my approaches to accessibility and allow me their platform to really, widen the scope of the offering. But for now, I'm happy to just share my musings with the world in large print. But certainly, that's a goal of mine to be able to tell broader stories from other voices, and more classic stories that are already out there, presented to the market in that large print, in that reverse contrast.
As far as the font size go, what makes it large print? What do you say, okay, this has to be X number of points? How is that determined?
For me, I think the large print market for, let's say, adult novels is somewhere around maybe 28 or 30. How I define large print is, am I optimizing the full text space that I have to work with?
Mhm.
So I have a font as high as 140, and I kind of created a floor for myself, a minimum at 90.
Wow. Okay. And how about the font style? Do you just use an Arial? What do you use?
Right. I generally just try to stick with Arial. On the covers, I make it a little more fancy, but I try to choose a bold, straight font for the text of the books.
So, Krystle, are you self-publishing right now?
I am. I
Okay.
am.
Okay. I'm curious too, there are the barriers to print for some of us. I'm low vision as well. What did you encounter on that journey from, okay, I see a void in the market and I'm ready to fill it. But, of course, there are many steps along the way before that product actually is born or published in this case.
Right.
What about that journey in terms of barriers along, finding how to you mentioned watching YouTube videos, but
Right.
did you also encounter accessibility challenges as you were trying to get to publishing your works?
Absolutely. It was definitely a slow walk to the launch. I
Yeah.
think on paper, I was incorporated and official and all those things. And then I had to figure out what I was doing, right? And I was definitely learning as I went, because certainly there's the temptation to wait and find out everything you need to find out and then have all your ducks in a row and leap. But then during that time, you could kind of, lose the gusto to
Yeah.
actually take the leap. So I said, all right, what's the worst thing could happen, right? I make a mistake and then I fix it. So,
Mhm.
the process was definitely learning as I go. And so when working with illustrators for the first time, it was kind of understanding what their needs are for me in terms of being very, very detailed in terms of how I wanted each page to look. So,
Mhm.
for me, I would do a mock up for each page. That was a learning process to understand how to properly convey my message to the illustrators so they could see the vision and bring it forth. I think there are certain methods that are commonly used in the picture book arena. I think graphic artists and illustrators usually have, their way with how they construct the page, and then the words are kind of fit in afterwards. But my approach has always been, okay, how do we dedicate, you know, two-thirds of this one-sided page here to the words, and then let's get an engaging image in what's left. And so having those conversations with them so they can really understand what my goals are, sharing with them what is high contrast, sharing with them what it means to be visually impaired, and
Yeah.
why, detail might be
Yeah.
difficult for someone with central vision loss, or detail that's pastel might be difficult for someone who has, let's say, like a cataract, where things are
Mhm.
not as sharp.
Mhm.
There was a lot of an education that would have to happen. And they were educating me too about, well, what's feasible, right? So there's certain colors that I want to make it pop. well, okay, if I'm working with a printer that prints in CMYK, those colors are not always as brilliant as the RGBs, right? So how do we create a balance where we are getting what I want to achieve and then what's actually feasible in terms of the printing?
That
So
is so interesting.
yeah,
You learned
it was definitely a
educated a
learn as I
lot.
go. Hmm.
Yeah. And when you find, so have you, with all of these, have you worked with the same illustrator or have you had to switch off per project?
I have had to work with different illustrators. I think my dream in the beginning was that I would get sort of a partner, and
Right.
me and that person would just charge forward. But what I realized is that every illustrator has their signature look, right?
Mhm.
They may have a diversity in the types of animations they can do, but at the same time, there's going to be a color palette that they lean towards, et cetera. And so if you want some diversity in what your books look like, it may benefit you to try different illustrators and get a different
Mhm.
take on your vision. And so I found that to be useful in the process. And at the end of the day, illustrators are, making their living, right? And so they have multiple projects that they're taking on. And so where I may be like, okay, let's get started on the next book, it's like, all right, well, let's loop back in 3 months because I took these other, few
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I can either wait around or I can, just see and
Or
network
find
and see.
someone else. Mhm.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And then loop
But
back to them, right? Because it's all positive exchanges. It's just, getting in where you fit in.
mhm.
I'm curious if you have ever tried any of the AI models to do the graphics. Ideogram.ai, Dolly 3, Dolly, I guess at this point it's past 3, to give it a go to see. They're not perfect, but at least something that might get close to what you want, that you could then, if you need to find an illustrator, maybe that's something, hey, I want it to look something kind of like this, but change this or change that. And then at least you have a blueprint for the person to work on.
Well, I did take like a workshop from an influencer online to learn how to use AI in terms of books. But in the process, what I learned is yes, that it's not a perfect science just yet. If you generate, let's say, a character, and then you want to generate that same character in a different scene, in a different pose, their outfit may look a little different, their hair may look little different, their face may look a little different. And it's not a consistent, and then even when you're placing them into a background, it's not like you can get a full background generated. It's like you're generating a background, then you're generating the character, then you're laying the character into the background. So it starts to look very AI-ish. And that just didn't appeal to me. And then also the color boldness and contrast. All of my images are bold outlined. That really wasn't an option with the AI generated stuff. And then the last thing that sort of turned me, I wouldn't say turned me off, but maybe know that that wasn't an option for me, at least not at this time, was that you cannot copyright any AI generated images. And so I pride myself on, being a visionary and seeing the pages in my head before, I present it to the illustrator and they bring it to life. So I would like to copyright those images. And in terms of the mock-ups that I do give my illustrators, I'm pretty detailed because what I do is I go online and I get clip art as like placeholders. And so I basically like create the scene for them. And then obviously they make it look like an actual scene and not a collage.
Go. And as far as the illustrators go, where do you find them? Do you have people in your area? Do you search the country? Do you go overseas? Where do you usually find the illustrators?
Well, one thing that's been really effective for me is my social media. Like I've done posts that say, illustrator needed.
Mhm.
And then, you field those DMs and that sort of thing. And then there are the usual online spaces for freelancers. And you have to, have some good conversations beforehand to kind of understand what, their skill set is, because sometimes you might look at a portfolio, but that may not be totally reflective of, okay, so for example, if they have a vision in their mind and they draw it. Sometimes that's a little different than bringing forth your vision, right? Because that's something that came from them. And so just sort of understanding what their abilities are, sometimes asking for like a rough sketch of the character before you actually move forward with the project. Because what you don't want to do is go on a lot of assumptions and then you're getting down the road and you're not getting the deliverables that you're comfortable with, but you still have to pay folks for their time, right? Because
Yeah.
they are investing their time and effort towards trying to meet your expectation. But maybe if there was some miscommunication at the beginning, that's probably what's led to some of the wasting of time and money. So that's another thing that I learned along the way, is to, do my due diligence to make sure that we are a good fit and that we are on the same page as far as the end product.
I wanted to talk too about how you get you mentioned being a creative writer. I'm not sure if you mentioned it here, but I know you had done a lot of poetry. I read that
Yep.
you've read a lot of poetry before. Is that what you draw on for your stories? And then I guess the obvious question is, what do you have up your sleeve next, or if you want to even share that?
Sure, sure. So, yes, during that time when I was losing sight, poetry was another thing that I delved into because it allowed me to sort of explore my mind and my heart and all my feelings and the human spirit and everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's also the mental gymnastics of wordplay, right? That was very, stimulating. So I actually eventually published a few of my poems onto artful canvases. So I do have a brand called Keys to Thy Castle. And the basis for that title is that I truly believe that as individuals, we are charged with making our own sandcastles out of the, you know, to be determined sands of time that we have, right? So we don't know how long we're going to have here on earth, but whatever life it is you want to live, it's up to you to create that, right? So Keys to Thy Castle was born from that concept because many of the keys within us, such as like courage, faith, determination, relentless belief in one's own abilities, etc., are the keys to opening those doors for whatever experience you're trying to have here in life. And so, since each one of my poems, I believe, has a theme around those particular keys, that's where I guess the concept of the name was born. So, Keys to Thy Castle is that company, and that one is KTTC Decor. But as far as my inspiration for the stories, it's first what might be an engaging story for kids that also leaves them with a little nugget. When you would watch The Magic School Bus or any one of these Saturday morning cartoons, it was entertaining, but it always left you with a little bit of a message, right? So I think that's what inspires me about my books, even my bedtime story. There's a moment in there where I give a moment for giving gratitude for your day and the different positive things that may have occurred. There's a moment in there where I say, take a moment to think about your future, oh so bright. So just a little bit of baby mindfulness
Mhm, mhm,
in the bedtime story. And then some other ones, When You're the Expected is kind of a
mhm,
satire on babies' first days and months. And that book is actually an intentional book around introducing baby to those first 18-month milestones in terms of language. So there's moments in there that talk about your eyes, your nose, your ears, your toes, say mama, say dada. So those are all those repetitive phrases and things that parents want to overexpose their kids to. So they do start to, turn those babbles into words in the time frame that it would be expected. Another one is called What's So Special About Books. And that one is a great book for the school and library setting because as children matriculate, to understanding more about books, that they're not toys, right? We don't rip their pages because we like the sound that it makes,
mhm,
you know. And they come from your imagination. They can take you to a place called imagination. Just allowing them to see books to be as magical or as entertaining as, all of the cartoons that we put on for them. And then my fourth book that's currently available on my website is called Rubber and Glue. And it's my dissection and remix of that old school playground saying, I'm rubber, you're glue. Anything you say to me bounces off of me and sticks to you. And that was the phrase that you would use if anyone was trying
mhm,
to put you down or say something to slight you in some way.
mhm, mhm,
And so it's a book of metaphors. I have a main character who's a stick figure who goes through different scenarios and it teaches a child, I guess, it simplifies more complex concepts to help them understand that their real power and their real value comes from within and that there's going to be a lot of chatter
Yeah.
outside of themselves, but you just have to leave it out there and really look inward to know what direction to take and what's your true joy and your purpose and all of those things. And one of the things that really inspired that book is you'll oftentimes hear an adult say, "Oh, when I was a particular age, there was an adult or a teacher or someone who said I wasn't smart enough,
Mhm,
good enough,
mhm,
attractive enough," whatever the case was. And they put it in their heart. And then it became a foundation of limiting belief on top of limiting belief. And then they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're unpacking those things as to why they never tried certain things in life or why they never exposed themselves to certain things. But it's because they've been holding on to that statement that came to them at that formative time of life. And so my hope is that if a child is receiving negative messaging in the world that maybe their parent is unaware of, because obviously as a parent, if you were to hear that, you would check it right away and set it straight for your child.
right.
But if this is happening in the world and you're unaware of it, a book like mine gives them, empowers them to release that and let them know like, oh, that really wasn't about me. That was their baggage.
Mhm, mhm.
So
So,
that's rubber and glue.
yeah. So, are there works that will follow up on what you already have, or are you looking to produce something completely new and different?
Well, I actually have already about $4 in the sample phase because I do hold inventory. I mean, I could just keep writing books, and I would have just a mountain of books take over my whole house.
Wow.
But right now, I've switched gears from the production side of things, which is sad for me because I get a lot of joy in the creative process of the books. But right now, it's really more the marketing and getting my name
Okay.
out there, getting people to know that I exist and the
Okay.
brand exists,
Mm,
and to really platform the 4 books that I currently have.
mhm.
But I already, like I said, have 4 other books in the sample phase, just waiting to be ordered in bulk. But I am waiting to be better situated to do that.
That makes sense. Get your footing
Yes,
kind of settled. I read something that I really want you to speak to. I think
sure.
this is your quote, and I wonder, do you remind yourself of this? But I think you said this. Inside every disability lies an extraordinary opportunity for accessibility and inclusion and inclusive innovation. Was that your
Yep.
quote?
Accessible and inclusive innovation. Absolutely. Yes.
So is that something you always remind yourself of as you are marketing now as opposed to,
Oh,
more
yeah.
creative?
Absolutely. I mean, it is how my organization learn.
Yeah.
I think if you have a disability of any kind, you're meeting barriers all the time. And if you have a disability, you probably have a unique workaround for how you do that thing that you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas other people might not understand it, but it works for you, right?
Mhm.
And when it came to the barrier of not being able to participate comfortably in story time, tech free, screen free, you know, once you start once you look beyond the barrier, okay, well, what is the barrier? That I need things larger, that I need a higher contrast.
Mhm.
Okay, well, who can do this? Publishers, but they don't know that they should, or they don't want
Right.
to, or whatever. Okay, well, I'm a creative person. I can do this, right? So you always have to look for beyond the barrier, because
Mhm.
beyond that is universal design, universal access.
Mhm.
Because I started the company as a visually impaired mom, and now I'm being approached by TBIs who are saying that it's helpful for visually impaired children.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
when I said I approached it as a mom, it's because I was, reading to young kids who couldn't read yet. But I'm being told that even young kids who can't read yet need to be able to see the words,
Mhm.
right, as they're hearing it, to start that fundamental, literacy skill development,
Mhm.
right? Then I'm being approached by people on the neurodiversity spectrum. Again, mind blown. I never knew it would have such broad application.
Mhm.
Then I'm being approached by teachers who are saying, well, this is just great that when I hold it in front of the class, they can actually engage with the words and not just the picture. Because even a fully sighted child is not reading font 12 from, across the room.
Right. Right. Right.
And the list just goes on. And I'm like, wow, okay, so
Yeah.
I lowered a barrier for myself. And I'm basically lowering a barrier for many other communities that I wasn't even aware of.
Mhm.
Right. So when I thought about that, that's where I came up with that quote. It was basically like a mantra, if you will, for what I was doing with my books, pioneering an entirely new genre of children's books.
I think that's fantastic how
Thank
the
you.
tentacles have just reached beyond what you even initially
Yes.
thought. I do have to share a funny story before we talk about where people can find you and what other,
Yes.
maybe there's some events or speaking engagements. I'm not sure what other kind of appearances you want to share, but
Yes.
I listened to one of your interviews talking about your challenge of facial recognition,
Yes.
which is my challenge. And I was literally like, I'm listening to this. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Because let
Yes.
me tell you, I have had full conversations with the wrong person.
Yep.
I'm talking, some
Yep.
people are just polite, but
Mm-hmm.
two different instances, I'm talking to somebody like, wait a minute, this is not that person. So it's it's just so nice to hear of other people like who, because you think, okay,
Oh
this
yeah.
is just this weird thing I have being in
Yep.
between the world of seen and not seen. And and we are, a small minority, but still there's not
Yes.
alone.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I
Tons of stories with that. Tons of stories.
yeah,
One
yeah.
comes to mind where I was at a social event with a friend, and we were like doubling up on events, right? So we went to like a happy hour, then we were going to a birthday party after. And the happy hour was more of like a professional networking kind of thing.
Mm.
So when we were getting ready to leave, she was like, "Oh, I'll be right back. I'm going to the bathroom." I didn't know she was going to change.
Oh
And
dear.
so here I am looking
No,
for
you
the
can't do
color.
that.
Exactly.
You can't do that. You can't gain or lose a lot of weight. You can't change
You
your
can't change
hair.
your hair.
I'm sorry, continue.
So then I'm in the crowd. I'm like, she's taking a while. So now I'm like, okay, I vaguely remember the direction of the bathroom. Let me start moving in that, direction. So, I'm seeing all the blobs of people around me. So I'm like, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. And then I hear a familiar voice and she's like, Krystle. And I'm like, oh, which one of these blobs is talking to me?
Oh my goodness. Oh my, shame on her. She should know better. It's always the other person's fault, right?
I just changed my shirt. And I was like, do
Yeah, you can't do that. You just can't do
that?
that. I am so glad Simone shared her story. And when she was sharing it, David and I were talking about it, and I saw how to contact you through the great app that we had for our convention. But it's always so nice when we can get that personal story that leads to having someone like you on the show, because it just makes what you're doing just that much more practical and
Thank you.
just real and
Yeah.
usable and needed. So
Mhm.
thank you for finding that void in the market. So Krystle, how can people get your books? Are you in any stores? It's all online for now.
Well, I'm going to claim positivity and no,
Okay.
it's not yet in stores.
Mhm.
It can be found on my website though at www.abilitybooks.com, www.iabilitybooks.com.
And what about socials?
Sure. So I'm most active on my Instagram, and you can follow me at inside_ability_books. That's inside_ability_books.
Isn't that funny how here we are, three people that can't really see, and we're talking about a visual medium. I mentioned to you in the email before we earlier today, well, we don't use the video except for on the socials, which none of us could really
Right.
see.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
words that will come up there as you're speaking will have,
Mhm.
we can't see them. I can't stand to watch shorts because they always have music playing and it's so nice. And you wonder, I wonder what those words say.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh my
And
gosh. I
it's
try to like pause it and then magnify it. It's
Right.
just terrible.
Right.
It's
Right.
terrible. Or take a screenshot and magnify.
I've
But
right.
done
it's like,
that. Mhm.
how many times are you going to do that in like a 7-second video?
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
There
Exactly.
are some apps for that, and I will put a couple of them in the show notes so folks can try that on Instagram. I've never tried it on Instagram. I try it all the time with Be My Eyes, their AI component for
Oh,
images,
okay.
but there is one out for video that is actually pretty good, but I don't know how it will work on Instagram. I've never tried that, so now I have a task.
Mhm.
Got it. Got it.
Any appearances or places where people could watch you?
Actually, I am currently a contestant in the Miss Blind Diva Empowerment Pageant held by the Eyes
Yes, yes, we're
organization.
familiar with them.
Yes,
Yeah,
Yes.
and we will
yeah.
put a link to that episode in the show notes as well.
Mhm.
Oh, great, great. So on my website actually is posted my contestant video, which is a YouTube video. And there is actually a competition within the competition for likes on your video. So
Right.
please do make your way to that www.iabilitybooks.com, scroll all the way to the bottom. You can click on it, it'll take you straight to the YouTube, and then you can give me that thumbs up if you'd like to see me go all the way.
And then what is the deadline for that?
The pageant is October 26th, so you have
Okay.
actually up until about 3 o'clock on October 25th. And this is actually their 8th anniversary, and they are the only pageant for visually impaired and blind women in the nation. So I'm really trying to push and get them as much exposure as possible because this needs to be everywhere. For our
Yeah.
community, we need this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Krystle, it was a delight to meet you, and we wish you all the most hugest success ever.
Thank you.
Um, it'll be nice to look back later and say, we knew her when she started that line, and you've got your illustrator that you're partnering with. I
Don't
think it will
worry.
definitely
I will get you
grow.
the press pass. I will get you all the press passes.
That's great. That's great. You'll remember our humble beginnings here. Thank you so much. It was
Thanks,
really a
Krystle.
pleasure having you.
Thank you, guys. I really, really do appreciate it. Any of these types of interactions that allow me to just share the story and throw it out there, I really do feel like I'm doing the Lord's work and I am the little engine that could. And I have a mountain ahead of me, but you know, mountains can be moved too. So
That's
I'm just
right.
gonna keep trucking. I'm gonna keep trucking.
Thanks again to Krystle for coming on and giving us the inside story of her publishing and her story writing. What a great inspirational story it is. And I hope that that just keeps going for her and she builds her brand and she comes out with a lot more books.
And I think she will, David. I think we're watching only the very beginnings of what's going to be around for a long time to come. And for anyone who did not hear, we've referenced Simone quite a bit. If anyone did not hear what she shared, so what happened? We had asked some of our first time convention goers to share their experiences. What were some of their most memorable moments? And Simone talked about meeting Krystle, seeing these books, which were literally an answer to her prayers.
So let's listen to Simone. We'll just play a clip here of what she told us.
I have two twin nieces, and when I was over the house and I was playing with them, one of them would run up to me and say, Auntie, can you please read this book? Can you please read this book? And I would always have to respond and say, oh, I'm sorry, baby. Like, Auntie can't see the pictures and can't read the words. And then the other one would come and say, Auntie, can you please read? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, baby. Auntie can't see the words or the pictures. But then I would try to turn it around and say, okay, well, tell Auntie what's on the page. What do you see? What's this? And what's that? To try to, take the light off of me in that moment instead of making like a sour moment. But it was a sad moment for me, because I can't read these words. I can't see these pictures. And of course, yes, I could use the assistive technology devices, or I can even use the apps on my phone. But sometimes you just want to be able just to open up a book and read it. A simple moment like reading your nieces a book. And I would talk to my sister about it like, man, I gotta find me a book. I gotta find me a book that I can read to them and not have to keep denying them of that moment, that memory to have Auntie reading to them. So fast forward to convention. I go to the exhibit hall, and one of the first places that I went to was the table for Inside Ability Books with author Krystle Boateng. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. But she is the author of books that are large print with high contrast and illustrations. And there are 4 children and parents who are low vision. So I just happened to go over to the table and I saw her books and I saw it said large print text. And I opened up the books and I'm just like, wow, I can read what's on the page. And for me, high contrast is best. So not only was it large text, but it was high contrast, which took a lot of the stress and glare. I mean, it's still there, but I was able to read it. And I didn't realize that it was going to impact me the way that it did. And even now when I talk about it, I feel the tears coming to my eyes again, where this is where I need to be. They get it. They get it. She gets it. And it was just that moment, like, I'll be able to read my nieces a book, where if they say, Auntie, can you read this book? Or I can say, hey, Auntie has a book for you that I want to read. And it's more than one. I had a moment and it just hit me and I broke down and cried. To the point where Krystle, the author, she comes around the table and we just had a moment of embrace. It just felt so good. It's like, yes, this is my community.
So there you have it. And it's always nice when we can bring in a personal angle to our topics, especially when it's one of our own PA Federationists.
Exactly. So if you've got something, if there's a device you use in your house or when you're out and about or some sort of service, whatever it might be, let us know about it. You could reach out to us. You can call 267-338-4495. You've got up to 3 minutes. Leave your name and town. If you do leave a voicemail, let us know all about the product or service that you use. And if you'd like us to contact you, please do leave your contact information so we can get more information about it and maybe have you on the episode when we do reach out to the service provider or company. And it would be a great episode if it's something that really helps you out around the house.
And if that 3-minute warning freaks you out, you can always email us. Our email address is whitecanesconnect@gmail.com. And we don't count characters.
Lisa, this is something that I love to have folks on. I have occasionally on my own podcast, a segment or a episodes called Blind Bosses. Krystle fits the bill. And I hope to have her on at some point, maybe well into the future when she's got more books out there and things are going great for her. I just love these stories about folks in our community who are entrepreneurs and doing something that is making a difference.
So thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you were inspired and enjoyed that episode, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening. Take care.